All right, welcome everyone to the August 25th Java Operators meeting. Looks like we have the full crew here this week. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Do we have any new faces that would like to introduce themselves? Fireflies? Now that we know what it's for.
Actually, what is it for?
Well, apparently in the CNCF, they've Zoom, they added this AI Firefly that can take notes.
Okay,
And I don't think it's configured.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know if it's configured. I haven't figured out how to set it up properly. It's been showing up every time we either have an SDK meeting or a Cube Builder meeting in different places. And I think the last time it showed up here, we kicked it. But it came back.
That last time as well, but
so it's supposed to be able to take notes, but we haven't configured it yet. So, or I don't even know how. I just know that that's where it's some setting that they added to allow for that. There was one thing I wanted to. Okay, so there are no new faces.
Well, there was someone, but I guess they left.
I did see something like someone named Tiger or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we scared them off with fireflies. All right. The one thing I wanted to show people is first draft, the federated governance operator framework. So put that in here. It's not what I wanted to do. Oh. This is what I wanted to do. Okay. Just for folks that are here, since we've been talking about possibly moving Java Operator SDK into the operator framework, this is part of the work of changing the governance to be a federated governance. So I think it would be useful if folks in this meeting have find some time to review it and kind of either ask questions, leave comments, and things like that. I think you won't be able to vote on its acceptance, but because this will affect your entry, and we want to make sure that it allows enough autonomy and things, and it becomes clear that so that you guys can ask questions about it. I think it's worth reading and commenting in the PR.
Yeah, so, actually mentioned that to our PM just yesterday, actually.
Okay.
And yeah, and I need to dig a little deeper to see exactly what that implies in terms of constraints and things like that. So yeah, we need to check what are the consequences, basically, because our resources are quite constrained already. So if it basically, I worry about added ceremony that we might not have time for, and that's my main concern. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, on the other hand, we are reaching a point where the SDK is quite stable and feature Feature-wise, it's in pretty good shape as well. So there, I mean, we don't anticipate major changes in the near future, or even further out. So maybe just a matter of deciding whether the time is ripe or not, or yeah, deciding, making sure that we are not putting too much burden on ourselves at this point.
Now,
But yeah,
when you mention ceremonies, what type of things are you concerned with?
well, I don't know. I mean, I have some experience with the Apache process, so like for the voting process for the releases and things like that. I don't know if there's something similar. But basically, yeah,
Okay.
like things that would constrain how and when we release, things like that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I think
Um,
those are all good questions, and I think worth asking. As far as I know, I don't think the operator framework has any plans on adding a ton of restrictions. I think we're largely trying to make it such that the projects that are within the umbrella can be as independent as they want to be, with I think a light guidance. I think some of the guidance is more around the what's the contributor ladder for someone who wants to contribute to a particular project in the
yeah,
umbrella, and what is the voting structure. I think each sub project will get a seat at the chairs table, which I think is a steering committee. So they will each project will nominate their own, and that will comprise the steering committee, so that they get a voice in future governance changes and bigger changes. But as far as release schedule for each of them and version numbers and things like that, we're largely leaving to the projects themselves. And same thing about like if they're going to do GitHub Actions versus they want to use Proud. I mean, we don't really care. It's mostly about how one contributes to the project, what is the different levels in voting, and kind of leaving it at that. So I think if you're familiar with Apache, you would have a a different view, that you could have a set of questions that we may not have answered or known. So I think those would be valuable questions to ask, and to make sure that we didn't like accidentally put in some restrictions that we did not intend.
okay.
But I think the reason we're doing the change is because the original governance was structured excuse me, towards a single project, and operator framework, while it was submitted sort of a single project, but it's always been at least two OLM and SDK. And then as we talk about other things that are kind of operator related, it starts to start making sense of maybe, bringing in Java, maybe bringing in even KubeBuilder one day, possibly bringing that into the fold if need be. But so we wanted to structure it so that it's easier to do that. And one of the things that we've worked with is the CNCF leadership as well. The conveyor project, they recently went through this whole federated thing. They had a ton of different projects from different companies. And so they made some edits to create this federated to kind of allow that. So that's kind of the model we're going after. So yes, I put the link in here. I can put it in the G chat as well, and that way, in Discord, if you want to have folks just go read it and comment and ask the questions. So it's a slow process. We go every time we talk through it in different meetings. We always feel like now I know what it's like for new governance, new new people trying to create a government for a democracy. If you're creating a dictatorship, it seemed very easy, but for trying to create it so that there's voting and things like that, it's like, wow, this is hard. So, all right. Anything else that we wanted to mention in the community interest?
I would like to discuss an issue later, if no other topics. I invited also Andrea Perufo, because we have a kind of had a long discussion today, and also with others. But yeah, just to mention that.
Which one was that?
First one.
Okay, umbrella issue, handling informer permission errors and probes.
Maybe I can give you a short introduction if you.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, there are 3 issues. Wait just a second.
Did you want to share your screen or?
Yes. Maybe
Okay.
that would be easier.
If that's easier, then I can do that. Yeah. There you go.
Okay, just 1 second. Find the issue. Okay, so this is the issue. There are 3 related issues, kinda. It's about the thing that we have informers in the operators, and the informers kind of tend to kind of fail or the operator not start when there is not proper airbags or permissions basically configured. And there are multiple related issues now that users are asking for. And then we have an issue I created for integrating some support for integration for Kubernetes probes. And that is also a little bit related. So basically the problem is, there are 2 problems. One is that currently, if an informer is started and everything looks fine and the permission is revoked or so on in the role, then it's, as far as I know, it starts to retry the informer a few times to connect against the service or work, but after a certain time or certain attempts, it just stops. And even if you put back the permission, it won't basically live again, so it will stop forever. So it's basically the operators will stop working in some sense. And there is the other part when basically it doesn't start up when there is not enough permissions for a specific informer. And there are these multiple problems, and we want to solve that in a way that it basically fulfills all our goals. And one thing, there are 2 aspects of this. So if an informer doesn't start or doesn't run, or basically, let's say if it's stopped working, meanwhile, then we don't have the caches up to date. We don't have even eventually fresh caches. And this is, for this reason, it's kind of tempting to stop the operator, because if a reconciliation happens, for example, a secondary or dependent resource created, next reconciliation, it won't see it, because if the informer is not working, then the resource is not in the cache. So it will try to create the resource again, the reconciliation, and that's basically will fail and retry and basically never will work again. So if an informer is stopped for some reason, and it's not somehow eventually restarted or started within the process, it won't have we won't have the resources in the cache that is required for the reconciliation. The other aspect, however, is why we cannot stop the operator is that we have this support. I think, I'm not sure if actually that is in Controller Runtime, but I think probably yes, that we can handle multiple namespaces and even dynamically add multiple namespaces, but that's actually not that much important for you, the dynamic part. But we can add we can add namespaces and watch multiple namespaces, and that is kind of a baked in. So it's supported explicitly to say that if I add dynamically a new namespace to follow with multiple informers potentially, then and basically it will dynamically add these informers and watch the names resources in the namespaces. So this kind of brings a specific characteristic to the operator that it in a cluster it handles multiple namespaces, potentially of a team, multiple team namespaces. But if someone revokes an airbag on purpose or just by misconfiguration of a namespace, then it won't be the operator won't handle that namespace, but it will crash, or now it will kind of not sure what happened, but basically it eventually, let's say, it will crash. So the goal here is basically, if you have such an operator which watches multiple team namespaces, is actually to work continuously, or don't stop working, and just continue work with other namespaces which are still there and there's still access to. So these are two problems, and for this reason we don't want to stop the operator in these cases. We want to just maybe eventually retry these informers to connect again and again, maybe with some exponential backoff, but don't stop the operator, because that will basically kill the whole cluster managing of the other namespaces too. So it's kind of not desirable in these operators. So it is, stopping operator might be desirable if there is just one namespace or the whole cluster is watched and there is a problem in the informer, but it's not desired when there is just a selected list of namespace watched. So that's basically the kind of issue. After a quite long discussion, we came to this conclusion that this might be a feature flag, and eventually integrated also, or potentially with, but not now, probably in the first iteration with probes, that either the operator is, if any of the informers is not working properly, we'll stop and quit. Basically, we kill the process. Or if in the other basic mode or the feature flag, if any of the informers is just stopped, we'll just try maybe some with exponential backoff to start the informer again and again, and just log that an error message or warning message that one of the informers is not working on this resource within this namespace. Okay, so that's the kind of issue, and that's the conclusion. Do you understand what is the problem we are solving? Or was that clear?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel that some of those things should maybe be handled at the client level.
Actually, Chris, some of them are. While investigating this issue, I tried using a proxy to make available and unavailable for the operator the Kube API server using a proxy. And the underlying fabricated Kubernetes client actually handles this situation pretty well. So in most of the cases, the fabricated Kubernetes client is doing a good job and is recovering by himself. But in some other cases, and the cases where we have loose ends or edge cases here, and we can find situations where the informer doesn't recover by himself, and a restart of the pod will be needed to recover from that situation.
But so
because the actual problem is that the operator is not crashing. So what happens is that the operator remains alive and running in the cluster, but is not able to operate.
So
and
the
caching detect that. I mean, for example, the transient RBAC change. How do you detect that? That's what's causing the informer to become I mean, should that be handled at the client level? If somehow the rights are revoked for the informer to operate on the namespace, because it feels like it's more a concern of at the client level than at the operator level. I mean, the operator shouldn't have to care about that layer, I think. At least theoretically.
I'm not sure in the sense that the Kubernetes client is behaving as expected, in the sense that it is throwing the exceptions, showing exactly what the error is, but those exceptions are thrown in background. And
what would you expect to behave? How would you expect it to behave in this case?
Restart.
Yeah. Yes. So that's actually an interesting point. That should we even restart the operator, or should we always just go for the restarting the informer? Because it won't solve the problem, right? Only problem when it makes sense to restart the operator or don't even start is because of the caches, right? So if there are multiple informers in place, so the caches are not fresh, and that could lead to some strange behavior or unexpected behavior. But otherwise, if the user knows what he's doing and what's happening, okay. It's complex, actually. I think there are some, for these cases when there's multiple namespaces watched, it's completely reasonable what Gyula is, the guy from the Flink operator, is asking for. That yes, if resources from that namespace we are not able to watch because the team revoked the access, we should operate normally further on the other namespaces. But we don't have the concept in the framework of informers belonging to a namespace. We have informers which are following maybe the controller. There is such a feature that might make sense. Yes, Bryce. Sorry.
Yeah. So. This actually sounds very similar to a problem that I've been working on a proof of concept for with controller runtime for like load-based operators. There's a similar problem, but it doesn't have like a dynamic namespace type cache. But so there's a similar problem where if you try to start a controller and then remove permissions via RBAC, it'll crash the controller eventually, just because it tried to create these watches at like a certain level, and if it doesn't have those permissions, then it will fail. And one of the things that we've been working on with a new like POC type cache is the ability for scoping controller permissions with RBAC. And so we're creating something called it's called a scoped cache. And so the idea is that cluster admins can provide RBAC that will scope a controller's permissions down to certain namespaces and certain resources. So if your controller, say, needs to watch deployments and pods, you set it up in such a way that whenever you reconcile a custom resource, you'll create new informers for specific to what that CR needs to watch. So your deployments and your pods would all be created with some sort of label or identifier thing that belongs to this custom resource. And you would set your informers to only watch the things that belong to a certain resource. So you essentially have a mapping of custom resource to informers. And then we have it set up in such a way that if it fails to start watching a resource because of RBAC changes or something like that, it'll stop those informers and the operator keeps running. It's a little bit more there's more complexity to it than just that, but I think that kind of logic would kind of solve the issue that it sounds like having here, where it seems like you're attempting to, if RBAC changes, something is going wrong, but you're trying to make it so that the controller is able to handle those RBAC changes.
I mean, the feature that you describe is what we call dependent resources, basically. So we already have that kind of feature. The question that we are trying to solve, I think, is what happens when those dependent resources, for in your example, the deployment of the pods, the watchers associated or informers associated with them stop working for some reason. I mean,
I don't think actually it's the same, Chris, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, so there are dependent watches, but the problem we're trying to solve is what happens to those watches if, say, a cluster admin decides to change the RBAC permissions so that the controller no longer has the permissions, or the controller service account.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, but I mean, that's the question. What should happen really? Because what does it mean for the operator if it can't know anymore about what happens to its dependent resources, right? If we just stop the informers because they're crashing, can we consider the operator as still being functional? Because basically it's bound to miss events that occur on those dependent resources. So is it still reconciling the state as expected? I would say that it doesn't. So should the operator still be running in this situation? That's the question, I guess.
So
go ahead, Bryce. Well, what I was just going to say is, I'm sorry, was that what I've heard from like controller runtime in that case of if an operator loses RBAC, as it is today, I would expect the operator to start writing errors. Hey, I can no longer access foo. Yeah. And then either continue doing that until an admin kills it. I know that my first proposal to controller runtime about having like a dynamic cache type of thing, they basically said if RBAC changes under the operators, then they expect the operators to be restarted. And most operators should be written to be expected to be killed.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. What should happen if it's restarted, but let's say it's started again, and there is still no permissions, and there is configured to watch a namespace, but we still don't have the permissions to watch that namespace.
Right. Then I mean, at that point, you would expect it to be able to create errors and say you don't have access to what you've been configured to do. Mm-hmm. I think like in controller runtime today, if you did this and you didn't give it permissions, it dies. It like just panics, which is what we're trying to, we're trying to fix. Go ahead, Bryce.
And that's what the scoped caching stuff that I've been working on attempts to resolve, is the fact that if you don't have those permissions, what it does is it'll stop those informers, but then any event, so Christoph is right that it won't be able to run any events if those deployments or pods change. But if that CR ends up being reconciled, what will happen, for whatever reason, if the CR is reconciled again, it should update the status to say, hey, I no longer have permissions to operate correctly in this namespace for this CR. So if you want me to be able to do these things, you need to enable that RBAC. If not, I'm just going to continue saying, hey, I don't have the permissions to reconcile this. It's up to you. The cluster admin decided I can't do this. I will continue.
It should operate in degraded mode, basically, where it's saying, oh, I'm failing.
Right. So that's essentially what it does. It continues to say, hey, I'm failing for this particular custom resource because it's in a namespace that I cannot handle.
Yeah.
Because the cluster admin said that they don't want to give me those permissions. Right.
And you could make the point that it should keep working for the other informers it still has access to, right?
Right. Yeah. And so that's exactly what this scope cache is kind of trying to do, is it'll do that failure for that particular namespace in CR, but it will continue to reconcile all the CRs and namespaces and any events that come from those, say like the deployment of the pod informers, that it still has permissions to have up and running. it'll still process all those events and do what it's supposed to do in the namespaces that it has permissions. And so with the scope cache, the cluster admin can, take away RBAC and add RBAC, and the operator should be able to respond appropriately. And so that's the stuff that we're working on. It's still in a very early POC stage, but that's some of the work that we've been working on. And I think there's been an issue on the operator SDK project as well that was opened, asking for the ability to scope permissions and stuff like that as well. So it seems to be a problem that's becoming a little bit more prevalent when it comes to operators and controllers. But
just I have some philosophical questions.
But just one question. Is it my understanding correct that this is a feature you are building on top, and that this is new, and having the ability to control different namespaces and keep the operator working, so it's something that will come in operator in the Go SDK, and this is basically a feature. So the default behavior should be, or has been so far, to just crash. Is it correct?
Right. The default behavior right now has been just a crash, and this is like a net new feature that we're working on.
But do I understand this correctly that so we have some kind of a special marker or something that if I reconcile this resource and I know that one of the informers related to that resource is basically not working, then I somehow provide that information for the reconciler. Is this?
Yeah. So essentially, what happens in the way that it's set up now is that it will remove the informers, and it will remove, like I said, it removes the informers essentially that are associated with that CR. And so the next time that CR is reconciled, it'll get like a forbidden, because the permissions aren't there. So those informers are only removed if any of the permissions that it needs are removed. Mm-hmm. And so the next time it tries to reconcile that custom resource, it will get a forbidden error, or like a permission denied kind of error. And then it's kind of up to the operator author how they want to handle that. But the idea is that you would update the CR to have a status of like, hey, I failed because I don't have the proper permissions to operate in this namespace.
But what's the recovery path though? Is it to remove the, I mean, like the operator framework won't, I mean, the controller runtime won't attempt to reconnect those informers automatically, right? It will be up to the user to fix the RBACs and then delete the CR and update it in some way so that it retriggers a reconcile and that in turn will recreate the informers, or how do you recover from that actually?
Yeah, so that process is also kind of up to the operator, also the way that it's developed now. But the way that I think would be best practice would be to just continue requeuing the reconciliation of that CR to check and see if you ever have those permissions. So you would continuously, the way in the demonstration that I have built for this POC, that's what I do is if permissions are lost and the operator doesn't have the permissions to reconcile a particular CR, it'll just keep requeuing it and it'll keep reconciling it until it has those permissions.
But if the informers are stopped, I mean, how do you restart them?
Yeah, so that's
the informer, or?
That's involved in the process of when we reconcile the CR. We're also creating those informers because the way that it's set up right now is that anytime you reconcile a CR, you would have to create informers for that CR, right? Because the idea behind this scoping is that we're only creating watches for the exact things that a CR needs, right? And in particular, only in the areas that a CR needs it. So if a CR is added to namespace foo, and it's going to create a deployment in namespace foo, it should only watch that deployment.
Yeah, so that's what we do with dependent resources, more or less.
How increase that? We are not doing that.
Well, yeah, that's what dependent resources, that's what they do. You define that for your CR, you have you need a deployment and a pod in namespace Y and namespace Z, and you create an informer for that. But we don't create an informer per custom resource instance. So in that case, it's different from what Bryce is describing in the sense that we don't create an informer per custom resource instance. So if the informers ever fail, we don't recreate them automatically.
I mean, there is, I think, a built-in retry in informers. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, we never create per resource. We always create for a namespace that watches, for example, deployments. That's the difference. And I'm not sure if I like that pattern. So isn't it a little bit heavyweight to have an informer for a single resource? I don't know, just saying it's a connection. And
well, I mean, at least in Java, it's definitely heavyweight, because right now an informer, it's like 3 threads, I think. So if you have lots of custom resources, I mean, obviously, if your operator is low bandwidth, then that's not an issue. But for people who have thousands or 10,000s of CRs, having 3 threads per custom resource, well, that's not even 3 threads per custom resource, it's 3 threads per informer. So if your custom resource has like 10 dependents, then that means 300 threads per custom resource. And that's definitely not scalable, at least not in Java at the moment.
To be honest, I personally like this idea to handle this on a custom resource or basically reconciliation basis, or bound to somehow to a custom resource, that if something is not working related to that custom resource, even if it's a secondary informer on a deployment and things like that, we just somehow even call a different interface or a different method. I think something Andrea also proposed, but just not on custom resource basis. To be honest, it's a little bit, it's maybe as a first iteration. So again, we are just, what we are doing here, or what I'm proposing here in the end of the issue is just to have this old way, supported the both way, to cache the operator or controller if it's something goes wrong with the informers, any of the informers, or just keep restarting the informers, and that might be good enough for some special cases, like in case of link operator. And we can, I mean, optimize that, like marking some of the informers like essential, that this stop the operator with the Boolean flag that this is a mandatory informer to run. If this is not running, then we should cache. And there are the other informers which are watching some resources in some team namespaces. Those, if fails, that's fine. We probably just the team revoke the permissions, and we will eventually remove that namespace from the list of namespaces we are watching. So that's I think so. Do you have this, and then then the third one is a compromise to do this caching the operator, but with a probe, where we expose some metrics about how long the informers, which informers are not running, and then the user can decide through a probe that custom logic then in which situation, exact situation I want to basically crash the operator. Because actually that's something similar to what I mentioned before, that some informers I want to run in all cases, and I don't want to crash if that's not running, and some informers I might be fine to not run. And we can delegate this through some metrics and liveness or readiness probes to the user. So that decision to fine grain it. And then we have this on the table that Bryce said. Yeah.
And just as like a proponent of or like a component of the POC that I've been working on is handling errors from informers with controller runtime. Controller runtime itself doesn't expose a direct way to like if an error happens on an informer, do this. But I wonder if I think it's Fabricate that you guys use for the Java stuff. I wonder if there's some kind of callback that can be set up on the informers that in the event that an error happens, you guys can, have a user put in some custom logic that, like you mentioned, can decide whether or not the controller will crash or not. But I think that's actually something that you guys mentioned in the issue as well.
I don't know. So,
well, in the resource handler interface, I think there's an error. I mean,
that's I think just for watch, not the informer. So the informer doesn't.
I don't recall exactly.
So watch has that for sure, but the informer I think don't. But that's what I remember it, or maybe it's changed in the new version. So yeah, it's anyway we need that. I think in basically any case, we will have to make updates to the informers. But could you send us some information about this feature you are working on, Bryce? And
yeah, I don't think I am on the Discord stuff, but I can reach out to Jesus to try to get that information, and I'll share the repos that I've been working on the POC in, and I have like a document with like some demos and some stuff as well that I can share.
Is it publicly shareable or?
Yeah. I just
because then I would say the best way would be to put that information in the ticket that Attila was showing, like as part of that discussion, so that we can follow up on this in the discussion and have all the information in the same spot. If you agree.
But to be honest, delegating this, so if you are talking in terms of caching, delegating that to the user to fine-grain when to crash, like for this Flink operator use case, or then I think it's eventually this is the probably the most open solution in terms of crashing. I'm not talking about this other solution maybe that's something that we can also do. So it's so it's not really competing solutions, I think.
Yeah, right now the POC does delegate a lot of like updating in order to handle the scoped permissions properly at the moment. It delegates a lot of like, the POC is just the caching layer that I have so far. It's not, it delegates a lot of responsibility to operator authors to update the cache and handle changing permissions properly. But the idea is that we'll eventually have some kind of higher level library that makes it easier for operator authors.
Makes sense.
But let me reinforce that the behavior that the Flink operator guys want is something that is advanced, and I would say an improvement over the current situation. At this point, I would really urge to have the fix for the current situation in the Java operator SDK. Do we agree?
So
the fix is the operator. If something goes wrong with the informers, the operator should crash.
So basically, they have a very
on top of it, we can discuss any optimization.
To be honest, I would do it. It's basically they have a very good point. If you're having like this, that you crash if there is at one informers cannot start, that basically makes it very fragile in the setup where you're just watching set of namespaces, not one or not the whole cluster, but this list of namespaces basically makes it almost unusable. It will make it very it's very problematic.
Only if you consider dynamic namespaces at runtime.
No. Also, if static namespaces. So it does, regardless of that, if you change it dynamically or statically, the users of a team can delete role binding or in their namespace, in the team's namespace. That usually in a setup of the clusters, that's something that the teams have under control. And that basically will bring down the operator, cache the operator that manages all other namespaces too. And that's clearly not what we want to happen.
What you described sounds to me as a configuration error with static namespaces. But
no. If you watch role binding is always in a namespace. No, if I remember it correctly, that applies to that namespace, and that's in a team's namespace. If a team decides that I want to, or they delete accidentally that role binding or for some reason, then the operator will crash because it won't have an informer access to that namespace, but it manages 10 other namespaces, 10 other teams. And it will basically never recover until somebody fixes it in the operator list of namespaces. So, and this is something that is really unacceptable. I mean, that will be basically not usable then in this setup, the framework.
I do believe that the other way around is more nasty in the sense that if you keep the operator running, but it is not watching an namespace and this is not evident, this is a really nasty thing to discover and debug.
I mean, that's why we provide the feature like that. Have it your way to cache it, and have it in a way that the informers will retry with an exponential backoff until infinity, and we log a message that there is something wrong with this namespace for this informer.
If you make this configurable by the user, this is a perfect solution.
I mean, that's the idea that we have both, which is just a feature of like, because that's completely, I think you are completely right that in the situation that it's one namespace or the whole cluster, it should crash. I completely agree with that. But in this other case, when there is a set of namespaces, and it's completely different story.
Yeah, but at this point we are agreeing that this is people who are writing operator that will decide which is the best.
Yes, exactly. And what said that with the metrics, I think that actually you proposed to expose which informers are not running and other information that can be then used in a probe or with some additional logic from the users that will make it easy to fine grain it to, okay, I want to cache the operator if this and this informers are not running, which are maybe watching some config maps for my operator, not for the team, and things like that. So it's so to have this decision logic also kind of available for the users. It's would be an addition. I would probably do it in the next iteration, not in the first, but yeah. So that would kind of improve on that, when to crash and when not to crash. So not just a feature flag, but yeah, some custom logic could be done there.
I mean, if we start to expose proper business metrics about what is going on in the operator, for example, with shared informers, if they are up and running, if they are expecting experiencing any error, etc., is a further improvement. And based on the metrics, we can attach probes, and based on the probes, so we can obtain the correct behavior on top of Kubernetes. So this is totally desirable, but this will be built on top of a solid foundation. So we have to get out this configuration that decides what the operator should do in those unknown situations and how to react to them.
Yes, exactly. That's I'm thinking too, that should be done.
Cool. It's nice to know that some of the problems that the Go side has recently been looking at and the Java side are kind of coming up around the same time versus, either ahead or later. So that's cool. Thanks, Bryce, for that and updating that. So
I'm working on commenting on the issue with all the resources that I have now.
cool.
A few minutes.
Thank you.
Quick question, since you are working on those things, have you started working on metrics from operators already, or props?
Metrics from operators. You mean on the Go side?
Yes.
I think the only place that we've done it was, I believe, on the Ansible operator. We had to make some changes to allow the operator to publish its own metrics. The Go side can expose its own metrics. I don't think we have anything that uses those metrics to basically do auto healing, if that's what you're referring to. But they should be able to expose their own.
And do you have a list of the metrics that are exposed? That would be interesting.
That I have to go look. I think there is. It's a small list, and then it could be whatever the author wants as well.
Yeah,
we have that also. I mean, just quickly, the Java operator SDK also exposes some metrics like number of reconciliations, number of failed reconciliations, things like that. I mean, obviously we could improve things quite a bit there, but no one has really asked for it or more information on that side. And maybe we didn't advertise that feature that much, so that people haven't been using it, but we do have metrics exposed via Prometheus.
Yeah, I know Controller Runtime, which is what a lot of the controllers created with Operator SDK use, exposes a certain set of metrics, but there's some community members in the Operator SDK project writing up some documentation and adding to our examples for Go operators how you can create custom Prometheus metrics. I'm not sure all the details on it, but there's some PRs up and a couple that have been merged for creating and enabling custom metrics on a controller.
Yeah, the other one, there's been talk about this notion of auto healing, which you end up monitoring your own metrics as an operator and try to fix yourself. We don't have any examples of that other than there's been one or two requests for having such a feature. I think partly because there's that whole capability level or maturity level where they talk about auto healing as like level 5. So
thanks. Interesting. I think this can be a starting point.
was there something specific that you were trying to figure out, I guess, or just in general?
No, it was in general because we were thinking we have acted about some metrics that the operator can expose, for example, the number of informers that are working, the number of informers that are receiving events or errors, etc. Yep. But I was trying to figure out if something have put some thoughts on those things already.
Yeah, and like Bryce said, some of those members that are updating our documentation, I know some of them are Red Hatters that are trying to help define what operators should all do, like for exposing metrics. In other words, hey, they should all have this prefix, and this will help SRE folks, and make it easier to see from a common naming structure of what operators are doing. And I think some of that is going into the documentation to try to help, hey, this is what you want to expose. There's definitely the common stuff, but then there's other things that they SRE folks care about that could make an operator's metrics useful. So that could be helpful for you in the long term.
Thanks.
Yep.
Do you have a reference document for this, or any reference we can look up?
I think those are PRs that right now. Yeah, if you find the PRs, and I can share them on in wherever you want. If you prefer Slack, Google Chat, Discord.
Yeah, whatever you prefer. Thank you.
Okay. All right. We have 3 minutes left. Anyone else have anything they wanted to bring up? All right. If not, then I say we call it here. Great discussion today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
It was
you, folks.
great. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.